Emma was the quiet daughter, the dreamer with an art degree, never quite enough in her mother's eyes. Set in the sharp-edged world of family expectations and quiet betrayals in Philadelphia, her life begins to unravel when the two people she trusts most, her boyfriend and her own mother, conspire to push her aside in favor of her ambitious older sister. Left heartbroken and humiliated, Emma flees to Chicago with nothing but a suitcase and a promise to herself, to rise no matter what. What follows is a journey of grit, reinvention, and a love built on mutual respect, not convenience or control. But just when she thinks the past is behind her, fate hands her the chance to stand face to face with the very people who once wrote her off. Will she seek revenge, or something greater? You're watching this story from insert platform/channel name, and what happens next might just stay with you long after it ends. The laughter from the living room spilled into the hallway, bouncing off the walls of my cousin's suburban house. It was one of those family events where everyone wore their brightest smiles, but the undercurrent of comparison and quiet judgment never quite left the air. I was 24, 3 years into a steady relationship with Ryan, and clinging to the hope that I had finally found someone who saw me, not as the daughter who always chose art over practicality, but as a whole person worth loving. That night the kitchen was warm and smelled of roasted chicken and buttered rolls. Ryan had gone to grab us drinks, but he was taking too long. Something told me to check, though I didn't expect to catch a conversation that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. I stopped just outside the kitchen door where a sliver of space gave me a view inside. My mother, Linda, stood near the counter arranging plates, speaking in her usual smooth, controlled tone. Ryan stood awkwardly beside her, 2 glasses of soda sweating in his hands. "She's sweet," my mother said without turning from the dishes, "but Claire is the one with real potential. You need someone who can challenge you, not someone who sits around drawing all day." My breath caught. Ryan didn't interrupt. He didn't laugh. He didn't say anything. He just stood there listening, his face frozen in an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother continued, her tone gentle, almost affectionate. "You've always had chemistry with Claire. She's ambitious, driven. Junior partner at the firm at 26. And she's always had a soft spot for you, you know." Ryan shifted his weight but didn't object. "I don't know, Mrs. Bennett. Emma and we've been together for a while." 3 years, my mother interrupted, "and what does she have to show for it? A part-time job in a coffee shop and a collection of sketches no one's buying." Her words sliced through me like glass. And still Ryan didn't defend me. He nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I backed away before either of them could notice me. Somehow I made it through the rest of the night, smiling at guests, thanking people for compliments on the store-bought pie I brought, pretending I hadn't just watched the 2 people closest to me lay the first bricks in a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. I should have confronted them right then. I should have pulled Ryan aside, demanded answers, demanded honesty. But I didn't. I went home with him that night. Let him kiss me goodnight. Let him believe I knew nothing. That was my first mistake. The changes came slowly, subtle at first. Ryan started mentioning Claire in casual conversation. He praised her court victories, noted how she'd gotten into running, said she looked great. I said nothing. Each compliment was like a paper cut. Small. But they accumulated. He started canceling plans, working late, watching legal dramas because Claire recommended them. One afternoon I found messages between them. Lunch plans that were never mentioned to me. Texts that ended in inside jokes I wasn't a part of. When I asked, Ryan acted confused. "She's your sister, Emma. What, you expect us to pretend we don't know each other?" I began second-guessing everything. My instincts, my value, my reality. Family dinners became unbearable. Watching them laugh across the table while I sat there, the invisible third wheel in my own relationship hollowed me out. Even my best friend Zoe noticed. One night after another awkward dinner she looked at me and said, "He doesn't look at you like he used to. And you're pretending you don't see it." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. But she wasn't. Something was unraveling, and the thread started in that kitchen with my mother's voice saying, "Claire is the better one." But the truth? That was only the beginning. The most devastating part hadn't even arrived yet. But the truth was, the worst part wasn't what I heard that night. It was what I would soon see with my own eyes. The air was unusually quiet when I reached Ryan's apartment that evening. I hadn't planned on coming over unannounced. but I had managed to get concert tickets to his favorite band, a surprise I was genuinely excited to give him. We hadn't seen each other much that week. He said work had been overwhelming. I believed him. I still had a key. We had talked about moving in together just a few months ago before things started shifting. Before my name began slipping out of his mouth less and hers began replacing it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. No one called out to greet me. No sound of music or TV. Just silence. I took a few steps forward and noticed something strange. A black blazer hanging over the couch that didn't belong to Ryan. Then near the hallway a pair of women's heels. My chest tightened. I kept walking. Halfway down the hallway I saw it. A silky blouse draped across the floor. I recognized it immediately. Claire had worn it at brunch the week before. She'd even pointed it out with a smirk, saying, "You could never pull off something like this. It's all about presence, not just looks." I reached the bedroom door. It wasn't fully shut. The sliver of space let sound pass through, soft, unmistakable. Laughter. Breathing. Movement. I didn't knock. I didn't yell. I pushed the door open. Claire was lying across Ryan's chest, her dark hair tangled over his skin, the two of them lost in each other's arms. Neither noticed me at first. I just stood there holding the concert tickets in my hand. They fluttered from my fingers like confetti. Claire turned first. Her expression wasn't shame. It was irritation. Ryan sat up, scrambling to cover himself. "Emma, this isn't." "Don't." I cut him off. My voice sounded distant, not like mine at all. "Don't say it isn't what it looks like." Claire didn't even flinch. "You were going to find out eventually. Maybe it's better this way." I stared at them. Not crying. Not screaming. Just staring. The numbness was colder than rage. Their calmness stung more than any betrayal. "How long?" I asked. I wasn't sure why I wanted to know. The number couldn't possibly make it hurt less. 2 months, Ryan said, eyes cast down. "But we've been talking longer." I didn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. "So it started after my mom talked to you." I finished for him. His eyes flicked up in shock. Claire looked away. They hadn't known I'd overheard. I turned and walked out. No screaming. No slamming doors. Just a silence so heavy it crushed everything inside me. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the furniture we had picked out together. Second-hand pieces from Craigslist, worn but cozy. Each item now looked like a prop from someone else's life. The next morning I drove to my mother's house. She greeted me like nothing had happened, as if we were just catching up over coffee. I didn't ease into it. "You knew," I said. "You encouraged it." Linda looked at me calmly, trimming flower stems at the kitchen island. "Don't be dramatic, Emma. Relationships end. Claire and Ryan make more sense. You must see that." My mouth went dry. "Why would you do this to me? Your own daughter." She finally looked up. "Because Claire works harder. She's going somewhere. You've always been the dreamer. You'll find someone who suits your temperament better." I stepped back. For the first time I saw her clearly. She never really saw me, not the real me. Only what I lacked. Only what I wasn't. "You're wrong," I whispered. "You always have been." That night I packed everything I could into my car. I didn't tell anyone. Jamie let me crash on her couch. I wasn't running away. I was letting go. I left 3 notes. To Claire. To Ryan. To my mother. They all said the same 3 words. "Watch me thrive." But I wasn't going to thrive in the ruins they left behind. I needed distance. A blank page. So I pointed my car west and drove until the map stopped looking familiar. And started looking like possibility. Chicago didn't welcome me with open arms. It greeted me with a thunderstorm. I pulled off the highway, windshield wipers screeching against the downpour, and parked outside a cheap motel on the city's edge. The flickering neon sign outside buzzed faintly, as if even it was tired. I had just enough in my savings to cover 2 months. If I skipped anything that resembled comfort. A single bed. A sink that didn't fully drain. The stale smell of cigarettes and lemon cleaner hung in the air. I gave myself 5 minutes to cry. Just 5. Then I opened my laptop and began the real work. Finding a place to live, a job, and a version of myself that could survive this. 3 days later, after viewing 12 apartments and being ignored by twice as many job applications, I signed a lease on a studio in Uptown. The building was old. The elevator groaned with every ride. My neighbors were an orchestra of late-night coughs, slamming doors and distant TVs. But it was mine. I pinned job listings to the fridge using pizza slice magnets I bought from a dollar store down the street, the only decoration in my sparse new home. Rent took up nearly 2/3 of what I had left. My countdown began. 30 days to find a job or go back to Philadelphia in defeat. That wasn't going to happen. On day 28, I walked into Meridian Investment Group for what I thought would be my last interview. The receptionist directed me to a waiting area where another woman, flawless in a designer suit, reviewed notes on a leather-bound planner. I sat beside her, suddenly aware of the wrinkles in my off-brand dress. A woman with a sleek bob and sharp glasses emerged. "Emma Bennett?" she asked. "I'm Carol from HR. I'm afraid the admin role's been filled internally, but one of our junior associates needs an assistant. Would you consider interviewing for that instead?" I almost said no. I was tired, discouraged, but I nodded, forcing a smile. Carol led me through a maze of cubicles and glass offices until we stopped at a corner desk that looked more like a war zone than a workspace. Papers were stacked in chaotic towers. Coffee cups, sticky notes, 2 half-eaten granola bars. A man in a loosened tie looked up from his laptop. "Patrick Reynolds," he said, standing and offering a hand. "Sorry about the mess. It's quarterly reporting season." I shook his hand, surprised by the strength of his grip. His eyes were tired but direct. "Emma Bennett. I'm pretty flexible about job titles as long as there's a paycheck involved." He smirked. "Honesty. I like that." He pointed to the chair across from him. "So, an art major from Philly wants to work in finance?" I could have said something rehearsed about changing careers or needing stability. Instead, I looked him in the eye and said, "Because sometimes starting over means burning the map and drawing a new one." He paused, studying me like he wasn't sure if I was brilliant or unstable. Then he nodded slowly. "I've done that once or twice." He hired me on the spot. The next morning I arrived at 7. Patrick had already been there an hour. I didn't know anything about investment reports or client portfolios. But I could organize. I could think ahead. And I wasn't afraid of long hours or hard people. I color-coded his meetings, alphabetized his chaos, brought him coffee he rarely drank, and slowly taught myself what acronyms like ROI and EBITDA actually meant. My back ached. My brain buzzed. I cried in the bathroom on day 4 after spilling coffee on an important file. Patrick didn't yell. He handed me a towel and said, "It's just paper. Data's backed up. Breathe." We weren't friends yet. But there was something steady about him. Something that made me want to keep showing up. Not to prove myself to anyone else, but because I felt like I was building something even if I couldn't name it yet. Lunch breaks became our accidental ritual. Food trucks. Tiny hole-in-the-wall spots. I told him bits about my past, never enough for him to understand the whole story. He never pressed. "You're a mystery, Bennett," he said once, chewing through a banh mi sandwich. "Most people can't stop talking about themselves. You barely give me breadcrumbs." "Most people have stories worth telling," I replied. He didn't argue. He just nodded and handed me a napkin. I didn't know it then, but the work I was doing in that chaotic corner office wasn't just for a paycheck. It was laying the first bricks of a new life I hadn't dared to imagine. The weeks that followed blurred into one another. I showed up early, stayed late, and did everything I could to keep pace with Patrick's relentless rhythm. He worked 16-hour days like they were a badge of honor. My job wasn't just to support him. It was to make his whirlwind life slightly more functional. Scheduling calls, organizing files, rerouting last-minute meetings, and tracking deadlines he often forgot. At first, I felt invisible, just another assistant barely holding her place in a firm that didn't value people like me. But slowly something shifted. One Tuesday evening, long after the rest of the office had emptied out, Patrick looked up from a pile of reports and asked, "Why are you still here?" I didn't miss a beat. "Because the work isn't finished." He stared at me for a second, then chuckled almost like he was surprised. "Fair enough." We started talking more during those late nights. Nothing too personal at first. He told me about his childhood in Ohio. How he was supposed to take over his father's construction business but chose finance instead, a decision that fractured their relationship. I told him about the gallery internship I'd left behind, how I used to draw faces of people who never knew I was watching. It became a rhythm. Not friendship exactly, not yet. but a familiarity that took root somewhere between exhaustion and shared silence. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he tossed me a wrapped sandwich as I reorganized the client portfolio by risk index. "You forgot to eat," he said. "So did you," I shot back, catching it. He didn't smile, but something softer flickered across his face. That's how it started. A week later, he accidentally texted me instead of his brother. Something about a terrible date with a woman who wouldn't stop talking about her poodle's diet. He was mortified. I laughed harder than I had in months. The next day, he brought me coffee with a post-it that read, "At least you don't have a purse-sized dog." Little things. Small cracks in the wall we didn't realize we'd built. Then came the morning he called me into his office and closed the door behind me. "I've been building something," he said, sliding a file across his desk. I opened it. Inside was a business plan. Bold. Focused on sustainable investments and underserved entrepreneurs. People the big firms ignored. I scanned through it, page after page, eyebrows slowly rising. "It's impressive," I said. "But why are you showing this to me?" "Because I'm leaving Meridian in 6 weeks to launch it," he said. "And I want you to come with me. Not as my assistant. As operations manager." The words didn't make sense at first. Thought he was joking. Or testing me. But he wasn't. "You know how to make systems work," he continued. "You see the angles before I speak them. You're organized. Smart. You know people." I shook my head slowly. "Patrick, I barely understand what half of this stuff means." "You understand more than you think. And everything else you can learn. What you already have can't be taught." I hesitated. The idea was insane. Risky. Unstable. But a quiet voice inside me, one I hadn't heard in a long time, whispered, "What if he's right?" And louder still, "What if you never try?" That night, I walked through the city in the cold, watching the headlights blur through fog, asking myself 100 versions of the same question. Am I ready to build something of my own? And when I walked back into the office the next morning, the answer came out of me before I had time to overthink. "When do we start?" I asked. Patrick looked up from his desk. "Next week." "You sure?" I nodded. "Let's build it." And that was how we became business partners. Not with a handshake or a contract or champagne, but with exhaustion in our eyes, coffee in our hands, and a shared sense that maybe, just maybe, we could turn our chaos into something meaningful. We hadn't crossed into romance yet. But something was shifting beneath the surface. Something neither of us wanted to name, because we both knew what we were building had to come first. We launched Reynolds Capital Partners from a one-bedroom apartment in Lakeview. The dining table became our conference desk. The couch doubled as seating for client meetings. I converted a closet into a filing cabinet and used an overturned laundry basket as a printer stand. Nothing matched. Nothing was fancy. But it worked, barely. We had no safety net, no funding aside from our own savings, and no clients beyond the one sustainable packaging startup that had taken a chance on us after seeing Patrick's proposal and my presentation materials. I had stayed up 3 straight nights designing those packets, printing them at a copy center down the street that charged by the minute. Patrick carried them into the pitch meeting with sleep-deprived eyes and absolute conviction. And they said yes. It was enough to keep the lights on. Barely. I picked up a part-time job at a small art gallery 2 days a week to help cover rent. Patrick took freelance consulting gigs when he could. We cut corners wherever possible. We had arguments about money. Real arguments. Heated ones. He wanted to invest what was left of our emergency fund into new software to streamline our portfolio analysis. I wanted to hold on to it in case we couldn't pay rent the following month. The fight ended with a slammed door and a long, tense silence. The next morning he made coffee for both of us, handed me a cup without a word and said, "We'll split it. Half for growth. Half for survival." That became our pattern. His ambition, my pragmatism. His long vision, my day-to-day planning. He dreamed big and I kept our feet on the ground. Somehow the imbalance worked, like 2 mismatched gears that still turned the same wheel. We were working constantly, barely sleeping, always thinking, always grinding. And yet, somewhere in the blur of spreadsheets and investor calls and late-night ramen, something else was growing. Something quiet. Something careful. We didn't talk about it. We didn't name it. But it was there. I saw it in the way he noticed when I needed a break before I even said it. The way he took over a call when I was too exhausted to keep my voice steady. The way he handed me my favorite tea without asking, or how he stayed quiet when I stared blankly at the wall after another rejection email. One night, after a client meeting that had gone horribly wrong, we sat side by side on the floor of our living room, eating takeout directly from the containers. He looked over and said, "You make this whole thing work, you know that?" I shrugged. "So do you." "No," he said. "You make me work better." The words sat between us. Not romantic. Not casual. Just honest. Unfiltered. 6 months and we finally got a break. A small energy startup, run by a passionate group of engineers, needed investors who believed in more than just returns. We weren't the biggest firm pitching them. Not even close. But we were the only ones who spoke their language. Impact, mission, long-term vision. Patrick spent 2 weeks crafting the proposal. I stayed up all night formatting, proofreading, and assembling the most polished presentation we'd ever produced. I even taught myself video editing to include a 1-minute intro clip they could show at their next board meeting. They signed with us. Then they brought 3 other green companies with them. We had momentum. That night, I walked into the apartment to find Patrick had recreated our very first shared lunch. Takeout from the Vietnamese place down the block. Spring rolls. Noodles. 2 mugs of grocery store wine. I raised my cup. "To surviving the beginning," I said. He tapped his mug gently against mine. "And to the woman who never stopped believing even when I did." The moment sat there, thick with everything we still weren't saying. The next morning we were back at work. No changes in titles, no confessions, no lines crossed. But we both knew something had shifted. Slowly. Quietly. And the weight of it was no longer scary. Our partnership was becoming something more. But neither of us wanted to risk it by rushing. The business came first. But love. It was starting to catch up. We never chased headlines. No social media announcements, no press releases, no interviews. We let our work speak. And over time people started listening. Within a year, Reynolds Capital Partners had become known in niche circles. Quietly effective, relentlessly principled, and selective with who we took on. Clients came to us by word of mouth. Small businesses, first-generation founders, mission-driven entrepreneurs. We weren't rich, not yet, but we were building something real. Steady. Intentional. Patrick proposed on a Tuesday night, while we were reviewing quarterly projections at home. No grand gestures. No rehearsed speeches. He just looked up from a spreadsheet and said, "Marry me." I blinked. "You're not serious." He was. "Be my partner in everything," he said. I said yes. 3 months later we married at the courthouse. Just the 2 of us, his brother Michael and Jamie, who flew in from Philly. I wore a cream dress. Patrick wore a charcoal suit. We didn't write elaborate vows, just promises that sounded more like commitments than poetry. He said, "Before work, before success, I choose you." I said the same. We had dinner at our favorite Vietnamese place. Mrs. Nguyen, the owner, decorated our table with paper lanterns and poured us champagne she'd been saving for a special occasion. It was small, quiet, perfect. After that, life didn't slow down. Our apartment, already tight, became an office by day, a marriage by night. We hired interns who worked from our couch. Took investor calls in our bedroom with the door closed. Our dining table held more paperwork than meals. I picked up hours at the gallery again to keep us steady. Patrick rarely slept. Tensions flared. We fought. Over spending. Over stress. Over when to stop working and start living. But each argument led to clearer boundaries. To balance. Then it came. Our first major acquisition offer. A large investment group, reputable, forward-thinking, wanted to bring Reynolds Capital under their umbrella. The condition: Patrick would stay on as CEO of a new ethical investment division. I'd be promoted to Chief Operating Officer. Full autonomy. Full resources. Our team would grow. Our impact would multiply. We accepted. The first week after signing, I stood in our new office. An actual office with a front desk and windows, and tried to take it in. All of it. What we'd built from takeout dinners and floor meetings. We moved into a modest 3-bedroom house not far from the lake. We kept our routines. Coffee before 7, client calls by 9, dinner by 8 if we were lucky. I carved out space for painting again. Only on Sundays, just for myself. 5 years into Patrick's new role, I had built our internal systems from the ground up. Our company expanded into 3 states. Investors trusted us. Clients recommended us. I stopped being seen as the woman behind the man. I was now the architect, the strategist behind our growth. I rarely thought about Philadelphia. Jamie visited occasionally. She never brought up my family unless I asked. I never did. But that changed one Tuesday morning, when Patrick slid a financial magazine across the kitchen counter. You might want to see this. On the cover, in a bottom corner, was a headline in small print. Davis and Associates faces bankruptcy after failed expansion. I froze. Claire's law firm. The one she built after Ryan left his job to join her. The one they had touted as the pinnacle of success. The article detailed it all. Ambitious growth, legal missteps, investor withdrawals. Ryan had taken a lower-level position at Meridian to stabilize them. Their firm was collapsing. Kept my voice level. You still follow news from Philly? I don't, Patrick replied. But Meridian's now on our acquisition shortlist. And Ryan works in their compliance department. Their legal arm still contracts through Davis and Associates. He looked at me carefully. I wanted you to hear it from me before the office starts buzzing. My stomach flipped, but not out of anger. Not even satisfaction. Just a quiet, unexpected stillness. Patrick spoke gently. We can walk away. If this touches a nerve, we'll move on. I shook my head. No. It's just business. He nodded once, slowly. Then let's treat it that way. 2 weeks later, the acquisition was finalized. Meridian joined our network. Ryan stayed in his role, technically now one of our employees. That evening, Patrick looked up from a document and said, "We should host a gala. Celebrate the merger. Invite everyone, old and new. From Philadelphia too." I paused. Everyone. He nodded. It's time they saw who you've become. I didn't answer right away. But a part of me knew he wasn't wrong. They had taken everything from me once. It was time they saw what I had built with nothing but grit, love, and everything they said I lacked. The gala was held at the Natural History Museum, the same place we had hosted investor events in the past, but this time it felt different. Bigger. Sharper. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a declaration. A statement of everything we had built, everything we had become, and everything we stood for. Planning was intense. I obsessed over every detail. The carbon-neutral transportation, the sustainable menu, the recycled paper invitations printed with soy-based ink. Our event coordinator noticed I was more involved than usual and asked if I was nervous. I wasn't. Not exactly. What I felt was something deeper. A quiet resolve. The guest list came together slowly. Clients. Investors. Board members. Then came the RSVP from Philadelphia. Ryan would attend, listed as Meridian's compliance officer. Claire would be joining him as his spouse. And my mother Linda responded with a note that read simply, "Looking forward to reconnecting." I reread that line more times than I'd admit. So I didn't flinch. 3 weeks before the event, I approved the final list and turned my attention to something I hadn't expected to care about. What to wear. It sounds small. Vain even. But it mattered. The dress needed to say something without trying too hard. Powerful but not performative. After several failed trips, I found it. A deep emerald gown, clean lines, low back, no embellishments. Simple. Timeless. Strong. The night arrived. Patrick and I walked in early, reviewing last-minute details before guests began filtering through the museum's grand entrance. The jazz quartet began warming up. Waiters arranged glasses of organic wine on silver trays. The space glowed under sustainable lighting, soft gold against marble columns. "You okay?" Patrick asked, straightening his tie beside me. I was. "This is our world," I said quietly, watching staff light the final row of candles. "They're just visiting it." Guests began to arrive. Familiar faces. Warm greetings. The usual flow of conversation and compliments. We stood near the entrance to welcome them, side by side. Him in a dark tailored suit, me in that emerald gown, a simple diamond pendant resting at my collarbone. And then I saw them. My mother walked in first, dressed in navy silk, her hair swept up with surgical precision. Claire followed closely, her expression unreadable, her arm looped through Ryan's. He looked older, smaller somehow, his confidence dimmed. They paused inside the entrance, scanning the room for someone they knew. I didn't move. Let them come to me. Eventually their circle brought them closer. My mother saw me first. Her practiced smile faltered for a second, just a second, before she recovered, stepping forward to greet me with an air kiss and a soft, rehearsed voice. "You look absolutely stunning, Emma." "Mother," I replied evenly. "Glad you could make it." Patrick stepped closer, hand resting gently at my back. "This is my husband," I added, turning slightly. "Patrick Reynolds." Claire's eyes widened. "Reynolds? As in Reynolds Capital?" She extended her hand to Patrick, ever the calculating lawyer. "Your reputation precedes you. I've followed the firm's growth with interest." Patrick took her hand but didn't offer a smile. "All due respect, Mrs. Davis, but this firm is a partnership. Emma's operational design is what made the growth possible. My vision had a spine because she built one for it." Claire blinked. Ryan shifted uncomfortably beside her. I turned to him last. "Mark Davis," he said stiffly. "Compliance Officer, Meridian." "Yes," Patrick replied, voice smooth. "We're familiar with your position. Welcome to the family of companies." Mark's eyes darted to me. I held his gaze with calm detachment. No malice. No anger. Just clarity. "The acquisition was finalized last month," I said. "Patrick will be announcing it shortly." There was no room left for confusion. No ground to stand on. The man who once left me behind now answered to the company I had helped build. Patrick leaned in. "If you'll excuse us, we need to continue greeting guests. Please enjoy yourselves." As we moved away, I caught my mother watching me. Not with anger. Not with pride. But with something she had never shown me before. Uncertainty. For the rest of the night, I didn't chase their approval. I didn't monitor their expressions. I simply lived in my element. This wasn't about proving anything to them anymore. It was about owning everything I had become, unapologetically, clearly, completely. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. Awards handed out. I floated through it all, fully present, deeply rooted. I moved from table to table, shaking hands with new investors, catching up with old colleagues, answering questions about our newest sustainable initiative. And through it all, I could feel them watching. Claire, Mark, my mother. Not in an aggressive way, not in anger. Just watching. Trying to make sense of the version of me that no longer fit the one they remembered. Patrick's speech came near the end of the evening. He spoke about our vision, our values, our future. When he announced the acquisition of Meridian, he did so with warmth and inclusion, highlighting Ryan's continued role as compliance officer. There were polite claps. Claire's expression stayed neutral. Mark gave a small, delayed nod, clearly uncomfortable under the spotlight. Afterward, while guests mingled by the dessert table, my mother approached. She held a glass of champagne with her usual poise, but her words came with more hesitation than I'd ever heard from her before. "I always knew you'd do well for yourself," she said. "You had potential." I turned toward her slowly. "Did I?" I asked. Because I remember hearing different things. She offered a tight smile and waved her hand as if brushing away an old joke. "A mother pushes her children. Elizabeth needed confidence. You needed motivation. What I needed," I said softly, "was support. And what I found was strength on my own terms." She looked at me, really looked, and for once said nothing. Just sipped her drink and stepped back. Claire was next. She came over alone. Her stride was purposeful, her posture sharp, but something about her seemed worn. Less polished around the edges. "Your husband's impressive," she said, glancing across the room where Patrick was shaking hands with the mayor. "The way he commands the room. You've done well." I held her gaze. "We've done well together. That's how real partnerships work." It landed like a soft strike. Not cruel. Not gloating. "It's true." She didn't reply. Mark joined her a moment later, lingering a few steps behind like he wasn't sure if he should speak. I saved him the effort. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." They left soon after. The museum slowly emptied. Guests filtered out with gift bags and leftovers. Staff began clearing dishes and winding down lights. Patrick and I walked out the back entrance just after midnight, carrying a box of untouched dessert. We got home, kicked off our shoes, and sat in the kitchen eating cheesecake straight from the container with plastic forks. He studied me as I scraped the side of the pan. "How do you feel?" I set the fork down and leaned back. "Lighter," I said. like I've been carrying something heavy without realizing it, and I finally put it down. He nodded slowly. They seemed smaller than I expected. I smiled faintly. They are. Or maybe I'm just bigger now. Not in status. Not in money. In what I know matters. He reached for my hand. And what's that? That it's not about proving them wrong, I said. It's about knowing I was never wrong to begin with. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Peaceful. Whole. We climbed the stairs that night with no speeches left, no unfinished business weighing us down. And I found myself thinking about the version of me that had left Philadelphia in the rain. That girl who packed her life into a car and drove toward the unknown. She had no idea what was waiting for her. But she chose to leave anyway. She chose herself. And in the end, that decision was the foundation of everything that came after. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to say they were wrong. Their absence had made space for everything I never would have found if they'd stayed in my life. And strangely I felt grateful. Because their betrayal didn't destroy me. It set me free. Closure isn't about confrontation. It's about walking into the life they said you'd never have, and realizing you've built something better than they could have ever imagined. Thank you for listening to Emma's journey. A story not of revenge but of reclaiming self-worth, building something meaningful from nothing and finding love where respect comes first. Sometimes, the people who break you are the ones who unknowingly push you toward your greatest transformation. And in the end, success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about becoming so whole their opinions no longer define you. Have you ever walked away from someone who doubted you only to find your strength on the other side? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that speaks to the resilience inside us all.